Welcome to the Dropping into Power podcast, where we'll be hearing stories about the transformational power of surfing from women surfers of all ages, all levels, and all over. We'll hear about courage, commitment, struggles, frustration, epiphany, and of course, life transformations, large and small. I'm your host, Sheila Gallion, and I am stoked to share these conversations full of so much passion with all of you. Aloha and welcome to the Dropping into Power podcast. I am so excited today to be interviewing one of my soul sister surfers from Kona, actually. And it's really funny because we really just only ever knew each other in the water when she lived here. And we would see each other, and she was always a great energy, and she was a badass on a big, beautiful longboard. At least that's how I know her. Turns out there's a whole other history to her surfing, but just a great energy. And then she had a big change during COVID and actually went on to make a massive life change. And I want to say she was actually living the life that most surfers could dream of living, surfing every day, free diving, paddling, full water woman. And she moved back to the metro land of Portland to become a police officer of all things in her 40s. So she answered this very big calling that kind of slowly evolved from this sense of desire for purpose, a different kind of purpose. So I thought it'd be really fun to interview her at a very different stage in her surfing and having had to, make these kind of heart-wrenching choices in a way like, oh, the waves, but this other big wave of life, maybe heart-wrenching is the wrong word. So make these. Yeah. All right. And Regina and I, so Regina Orlando is her name. And Regina, like I said, we knew each other in the water, but we really connected over social media, over her sense of purpose and our kind of shared view on the world and what matters, and got closer and had a few exchanges. And I just thought it would be so fun to have her on. So welcome, Regina.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm really excited to be here. And I feel very honored that anyone would even be interested in hearing my story or how my life kind of led me to this place I'm at now, which is night and day different from, the setting that you and I first met each other, which was in, those beautiful blue waters of Kona.
It's stunning. And I've also seen your Instagram where you'll post, sometimes you've had some, Oregon surf photos, and you've had some snowboard photos. And the one, of course, that made me drop my phone was the one that I'm going to put in the profile, which is you as a police officer.
I don't know. Because, we got those uniform selfies.
Yeah, we weren't in touch going through the blow by blow. So, being that the only time I ever saw you was literally in a bikini or a bathing suit, your hair down and salty. We talked about this transition a little bit, and we'll kind of, I think, just keep touching on what really prompted that move. In fact, maybe let's start with that. What helped you recognize this piece and this sort of new calling for you?
Had you asked me 3 years ago if I was going to go into law enforcement, I would have thought you were crazy. That wasn't really something that was even on my radar, but I had definitely reached a point in how I felt about living on the Big Island, where I had been out there 13 years and I really loved it. And, as you mentioned, I had a really good life set up in the sense that I worked at a really high-end resort, waiting tables at a restaurant that was only open during dinner hours. So that really allowed me to surf every morning, go home, eat some food, take a nap, and then roll into work at 3:00, tan, and, surfed out and make my living during those hours. So it was this really great setup, but I was just feeling very antsy. And then, of course, COVID happened, and I had two jobs. I had that waitressing job, and then I was also crew on one of the Zodiac charter, tour boats. So both of those jobs were furloughed, and I was sitting there for 3 months, just kind of waiting for something to happen. And as we kind of realized, this 2 weeks to flatten the curve was not going to be 2 weeks. Right. I started to really think man, when this is over, do I want to go back to doing this thing still, or do I want to find something else? And then, of course, everything that happened with George Floyd, that happened. And Kona had a nice little like sign waving event on the side of the highway that really felt really nice, because here's the community kind of coming together with this common support for a movement, even though we were in the middle of the ocean and don't necessarily have like the largest African-American population on the Big Island. There was still like a feeling of solidarity that felt really amazing. So that was kind of like the first part. I identify as a person of color. I'm half Asian, and in my youth, I had kind of dealt with a little bit of racial discrimination when I moved to a really small town on the Oregon coast. The kids didn't necessarily know what to make of my skin color. And even though I wasn't even very tan back then, I was pretty pale skinned, but they still kind of called me every like racial slur in the book to try to peg me with something. I don't know. So I guess I've always had like a little bit of a sensitivity to like racial stuff and social injustices. Anyways, all the protests started happening and I ended up in San Francisco, I think like in the second week of the protests that were, happening all across the nation. And I was with my mom and we went to an event that was happening on the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was hosted by 2 high school girls, right? So this was like started at noon. It was very family friendly, very peaceful. And we ended up marching east across the Golden Gate Bridge and then back again. And as we were coming back, I saw 2 police officers. And they were standing in the middle of the traffic lanes because they had shut down traffic, of course, because you have like thousands of people marching and waving signs. And they didn't have on riot gear. They were literally just standing there with their SUV surrounded by people. And, I have a photo of it. There's one guy holding a defund the police sign right behind these cops. And I like snapped a picture of the irony of the whole situation, right? But I walked up to those cops and I said, thank you. Like, thank you for being here and allowing us to, have this moment. And they were appreciative of that. And it felt good to thank them. And then, of course, when I got to the other side of the bridge, I saw the thousands of riot cops that were, in the wings waiting if things had gone bad, but they didn't, and those cops were just there just in case. But the 2 on the bridge really made an impact on me. And then, as of course, like social media takes on more of the role that it did and all of that, this whole idea that if you were going to support social justice and equality, that you were anti-police, or if you were pro-police, that you were going to not be supportive of the movements, like that really bothered me because I felt like I was both. I support law enforcement. I've never had a bad interaction with police officers. I think that there are obviously bad cops out there, but I don't think that the majority should be painted with like a broad stroke of a brush because there are some bad apples, so that kind of started the ball rolling. And I had the opportunity to take some criminal justice classes at a community college. So I signed up for those. And all of a sudden I thought, well, gosh, in the meantime, instead of taking out a bunch of loans, why don't I just apply for police jobs while I'm taking these classes? So that way, if I end up getting hired, then I won't have to get more into debt, as a 40-something-year-old going back to college. And I just got a police agency to want to hire me. I think off of everything that I just told you, I mean, it's a little bit unnerving when I'm sitting in a panel interview with the police chief and one of the captains and one of the sergeants in front of me. And I tell them that story, and I'm disclosing to them that like, yeah, I marched at those marches and I was there and waving signs, and that could have potentially blackballed me. But I think that they were interested in kind of bringing on somebody that has a different way of viewing things into the force and maybe creating a little bit more diversity in the hopes that would slowly but surely start to mend things.
It's really fascinating. I mean, you don't really think of Oregon, certain parts of Oregon, yes, but you don't really think of, having necessarily a progressive view in that community. Certainly there's, very diverse views within Oregon. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it just gives me chills, and, it's kind of a great ray of hope to me that, people are wanting to make this connection in at all these different levels and really think like, how can we make this institution healthier? Yeah. So you're a great example of that, just, I'm going to step into the institution and make it healthier. And being candid and allowing yourself to be yourself, you could have had such a different experience. You could have been hiding all that. It could have been a completely different story.
Yeah.
So it's very hopeful to me. And I happen to think of you paddling over giant sets, going through, to go through those really uncomfortable situations. We talked before, I wanted to actually ask you about this because this is one place where, they're not always going to understand you. You were talking about the adrenaline dump that you experience in the job and how that relates to your surf life.
Yes. So I was explaining to one of the captains at work, that law enforcement is a lot like surfing in the sense that there's a lot of downtime. You're just kind of sitting around talking story, in the lineup, everybody's talking. And then all of a sudden you get a call from dispatch, and sometimes it's a small call and you don't really have, it's like a 2-foot set coming. And then sometimes it's a big call and you're responding with lights and sirens and you don't know what's going to be there at the end. Is it going to be someone with a gun, a knife? Like you have no idea. And I compared it to that feeling of when you're sitting in the lineup talking, and then all of a sudden you see these dark blue mountains, from the deep ocean rolling your way. And you're like, oh shit, you have to scramble. And it's that, that instant, your heart starts racing and everybody's like going a million different directions. And not only are you watching the wave and trying to figure out where it's going to break, but also you're looking at the people around you. Do you have enough room from them? Is somebody going to ditch their board and might it hit you? There's all these other factors you have to consider in a really small period of time when you're scratching for your life, So I explained this to my captain, who's from Arkansas, by the way. So he has no idea of the analogy that I'm trying to make. And he looks at me like, okay.
Yeah, I can see you telling this whole story and getting really animated and like really getting it. And then the room just sort of staring at you. But
yeah, absolutely.
But I totally get it. And those, I don't know if we actually develop better reflexes or what, but there is for sure that moment when that's all happening. You described it so well. And boards are flying. And is this person going to make it? Am I too close to them? Or, do they know what they're doing? Does this person, and then, however that can go.
Like the sets passed and, maybe you made it, or maybe you got worked on the inside and then you're having to pay the price for that. But it's definitely, that instant hit of adrenaline, right? And it almost becomes addicting. You're like waiting for the next thing to come that's going to give you that feeling of excitement.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Yeah, because I'm sure, it's like when you watch, hospital shows, and it's just always exciting where, like most of the time they're just doing paperwork and it's boring cases. And, it's really not like New Amsterdam or ER or whatever with all that excitement. So thinking of that, we'll have some surfing questions.
Okay.
Oh, wait, no, before that, I want to get to one other question because we got to kind of get you from where you were to Kona.
Yeah.
And I was curious about this one thing, because you said, you grew up in the cold, right near the cold Oregon coast. It was not, especially at the time you're thinking of calling people into the water.
No.
There wasn't like a big cadre of surfers or anything. You said I think your exact words were, I just like partying in the woods. Exactly. And you did snowboarding and other stuff. But did you have any concept of women surfers? Did you have any concept of women watermen? Or was there, had you ever seen one, heard of one, or was there any consciousness about it?
We had family roots in Hawaii. So I had gone to visit on vacation a couple of times. We went to visit my mom's high school classmate on Oahu, and she had a beautiful daughter named Kaulana. And I remember going to the beach with them one day, and she was like so gorgeous with her long dark hair, and she had a surfboard, and I know she paddled out, but what she did out there wasn't really on my radar because no, it wasn't a thing. Like the town I grew up on is right on the mouth of the Columbia River. So the ocean is right there, but it's more of a fishing and logging town. Yeah, our time was basically spent up in the woods. There were 2 guys I can think of who surfed. They had graduated by the time I got to high school, but I knew that they were, diehard surfers. They didn't want to leave the area because there's this one wave from the Northern Oregon coast that's so good, and they're super local. So I'm not going to name it because people would be pissed. But I knew that there was like a hardcore surf scene, but at that point in time, this is like the mid 90s, it just felt more of like a Point Break, like only the
Right.
bank robbers surf the waves type of thing.
Right.
No, there was, I didn't know any women who were in the water. The surf town was about 20 miles south of us, seaside, but I didn't really like the girls I played sports against there. I don't know that any of them really surfed either. It just wasn't mainstream at that point like it is now.
For sure. I mean, it wasn't, in all fairness, it wasn't mainstream with men either. It was definitely, but way more, I've talked about that with quite a few women, especially who are a little older than you, my age and up. Like, we just never saw women surf, but actually 10 years earlier during Gidget times, there were a lot of women surfing. And I remember doing research on this project and finding out that men would actually push the women off the waves, not all of them, hide their boards, bury them in the sand. And they blamed the movie Gidget for a lot of the expansion of surfing and the crowding. There was a whole bunch of research I did for this character in the movie I wrote who was 80 and surfed. And so I remember, reading about that. It was really, so I think like there kind of were women and in the 60s and 70s, and then it sort of went more underground. Yeah. And it wasn't super mainstream. And that was Dogtowns and, the skating and stuff. Right. But it is interesting. I mean, I've had a couple of women say to me, well, I never saw an image of a woman surfing. So it's just like, you don't even think it's possible or it's not in your consciousness because you don't ever see it.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen.
I think that's definitely true. Being so rugged and kind of like wild and stuff. It literally didn't even cross my mind that going out in the ocean would be fun.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable too. I mean, for sure. That was like scary and freezing. Exactly. So you go more for family stuff, to Kona and decide to move, but you're 30 when you go there.
Yeah. So I get to Kona and I'm 30 and I had, in my 20s in living in Portland, there was like a period where I worked up at one of the ski resorts to have, you work up there, I sold tickets and then you get a free pass for the winter. So I was really into snowboarding. Of course, it was a boy that got me into snowboarding, this cute boy, and he was so good. And I wanted to be able to go ride with him. And so that's how I started snowboarding. But like most things, boys might lead us there, but then like you fall in love with the sport. So that became just an afterthought, but I had this really strong relationship with the mountain. And when I moved to Hawaii, obviously I was going to need to fill that void somehow. And surfing seemed like the natural extension of snowboarding. Little did I know, surfing is by far the most humbling and difficult sport I've ever had to learn. And I was pretty much self-taught. My brother lived out there. He had been on the Big Island for a while. The girl he was dating at the time surfed. And I knew I really wanted to get out there. And the first day, I bugged him too for like the first 2 months. I was like, when are you going to take me surfing? I really want to get out there. He wouldn't let me go by myself for the first time. He said, no, sis, you have to wait for me. So finally I get him to take me, and he gives me this board, and it's a 9.3 South Point epoxy board that is probably 3 inches thick. I'm not even kidding you. It was such a tank, but it was really stable and super easy to catch waves on. So he pushed me into a couple waves, waited to see that I could stand up, and then basically he took off for the lineup and kind of left me to fend for myself on the inside at Kahaluu. Yeah. Which is a great beginner spot. And there were some surf lessons being taught there, but obviously not to the extent that it is, today. Yeah, it was kind of self-taught. I would just flail around and I would get so much water at my nose. I remember like trying to wash my hair that first week. My triceps and my shoulders were so sore, like holding my hands up to my head, like my arms were aching. But a couple of the instructors were really nice. And I would just kind of like sit next to them and listen to what they were saying to their students and pick up on hints. And then, I had just moved out there. I didn't have any friends. So I would like get done surfing, go home, and I would immediately get online. And Surfline at that point, I don't know if they still have it, but they used to have these tabs where you could, it was like surfing 101 and surf etiquette and all these things that are like every beginner should learn, right? Yeah. Anybody worries about that now, but I really didn't want to be that kook in the water that was getting in everyone's way. So I made sure that I at least had some basic knowledge of what you could or what you should and shouldn't do in the water as I was learning the actual skills.
Oh, I love that. I relate to so much of that. So, haven't really talked on the podcast about what the conditions are like in Kona, because you're saying like, oh, good beginner spot, but paint the picture of what it's like surfing on the Big Island of Hawaii, which I'm going to give one little piece of background because it's nerdy stuff. I was a concierge here for, many years. Bottom line is the Hawaiian Islands exist because of a hot spot in the Earth's mantle. The islands are moving across the Earth's mantle. I don't know what the pace is, but bottom line is 5 million years ago, Kauai was where we are now. Yeah. So Kauai is 5 million years older. We're only 500,000 years old. So most people haven't been to all the Hawaiian Islands, but Kauai, has a little bit of everything, but it's eroded and it's got the beautiful waterfalls and white sand beaches. And, they definitely have rocks and coral and things like that. But our island has not turned into this. So I'll let you go from there.
It sure hasn't. Yeah. They say that Kahaluu is like the easy beginner spot, right? But actually that's one of the gnarlier waves in Kona. Once you get out to the lineup and there's any size to that wave, you really have to know what you're doing. But as far as getting in and out, there are 2 access points, either from the beach or from that little path through the lava. But on both ways, you have to really be conscious of where you're putting your feet, because there is sharp lava, there is tube coral, and then there's, of course, the vana, the sea urchins. So you can't just be walking blindly in the water on the Big Island to get out to the, to the lineup. You have to really be careful what you're navigating. And, every time I had friends come to visit me and they wanted to surf, like my first thing I ever told them was, if you're going to fall flat. Like you cannot be diving headfirst off the board. You can't be like, you have to fall flat and cover your head,
Yeah. And you can't put your feet down. No. So people come here that have learned to surf in sand. Maybe they're just beginning. And so they would walk their board out and turn it around. And you have to make sure no, you can't put your feet down when you fall, because there's a good chance you're going to stand on a sea urchin and tube coral is in some ways worse. It'll just slice your foot right open. Oh, yeah. There's just rocks everywhere. Like it's hard to explain, and it's really shallow, and the tide sucks out. And especially, you start to go out to the lineup and you can see in Hawaii, like it's beautiful. And so you think, oh, I'm going to try and go on this wave. And then you just see this gigantic, creaturous rocks reaching out at you and so you do get used to it in different ways. The wave also works. Like when I first moved here, the wave I just realized, especially on a short board, you have to sit right underneath where it breaks. And that's just intimidating, works differently than beach breaks. And, and there's many breaks where you have to walk out on points and jump off, or if you time it wrong, you get dragged into coral reefs. I mean, all you have to do is watch kook slams and you'll find some Hawaii jump off points. It's not, you don't have to push yourself into a lot of these conditions, but there's only really 2 places you can surf that aren't, pretty treacherous. Yes. So even getting in and out, digging your board, everybody I know, I'm sure you too, has lost multiple fins.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
You're coming in and your fins just go on some rock, and
I feel like learning surfing at all on the Big Island is not for the faint of heart, but definitely learning to surf there, it takes a different level of commitment to it. You have to at least be willing to step on something that's going to really hurt. Hopefully you don't, but you have to be willing that that's going to happen. And, but with that being said, I didn't really know any different.
Right. Exactly. I was going to ask you, you probably thought that was normal.
Yeah. Well, 10 years later, I ended up, I guess it was 9 years after I moved to the Big Island, I went to Oahu for 1 year to work. I was working at the Four Seasons, and they were opening a property on the west side of Oahu at Ko'olina. So I was like, sure, I was ready for a little change in scenery. I thought I'll go over there and I will open this resort. It'll be awesome. It'll be a great experience. And it was also probably the most stressful year of my life professionally that I've ever endured. But surfing some of those west side spots on Oahu was like, oh my God, I can just walk out on the sand and not have to worry about any of this. Like, this is amazing.
Right.
And it was hard to get back to the Big Island. I had total Howley feet, like walking
Yeah.
on the rocks at pine trees. I was like, oh shit, I got to develop all those calluses again.
Oh, right. Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. Yeah, just walking across the beaches, like chunks of gravel, so you get used to, you have the Kona walk, right? Where you just kind of learn to, absorb all of those things. So
Totally.
yeah, what is the most amazing place you ever served? Like what was your
that? Yeah, because you wrote that question and I've been really blessed to surf some, like, I went to Bali with some of my girlfriends and we went to Medewi Point, which is this really dreamy left point break that like breaks over cobblestone. That's the picture I sent you of me on the shortboard. And that was a pretty amazing wave. Mainly, I mean, obviously the wave itself was a good wave. I liked it because we had gone there from Uluwatu, which is like, 200 people in the water and they're all just super aggro, really intimidating. There's people everywhere. Like I didn't like that vibe. And Medewi was like way more off the beaten path. And so I had a really dreamy session there. And I had hired a guide that was recommended to me from another gal who had been there. And so he took me out and that was his home break. And he kind of called people off. So I was getting whatever wave I wanted that session. And he would tell me exactly, he would be like, paddle 2 strokes that way and then spin around and go. So he was like putting me in the spot, making sure nobody was dropping in on me. So that was by far like the best session I've ever had.
Yeah.
But gosh, I love Kauai High Breakwall. Oh gosh, say that. I shouldn't say that out loud, even though so many people know about that wave, whatever.
Everybody knows about everything now, As
a longboarder, I love Breakwall because it has size, but it's slopey. And so I don't feel scared. And you don't have to, like you were saying, sit underneath the wave and go when it's super kind of get on it and be up before the wave starts to set up. So I think that's my favorite wave in the world.
I just went there for the first time, actually. I just get in my little rut, but I've always had, all the time I lived on the Big Island, I've had a job, mostly been a single mom. So I get little tiny windows. So for me to drive to Kauai High, I never have the time when the swell is happening at the right time. But I did go out. Now I did not have an epic session, but it was big and beautiful. And I was on my shortboard. Oh, maybe I brought my 8-foot board, but I was tired and I was not going to go out, but it was beautiful. I could see how, it would really be a great spot. Now, wait, are you goofy?
I'm regular.
You're regular. Okay. When you said that, I thought you were regular, but when you mentioned it before. So I always thought you're such a beautiful surfer. Like you just have this joy and presence. I don't know how else to explain it. And you charge. I mean, you go, which it's funny because you told me you kind of don't really like big waves, but that's not really, I guess we have to quantify big waves.
Yeah. For me, I think my issue with bigger surf was that I never felt like I had the right equipment. Like there was a stint there where I was shortboarding a little bit more, and I'm glad I did that because that's the board I ended up taking with me to Bali, and that ended up being a fun surf trip. But my natural instinct was always just that I was going to be a longboarder, and had I been able to just kind of stick with that throughout the entire progression of my surfing, I think I would have felt a little bit more comfortable on my longboard in bigger surf. But as it was, I was like trying to step down so I would have a board that was a little bit easier for me to deal with in big waves. But then that means you have to wait a little bit longer to catch the wave, and it has to be steeper and faster. And that is where I don't love that feeling.
Yeah, I totally understand.
On a shorter board, it's like, I don't like it. Yeah, I'm not necessarily against big surf. And I would say that the best session I ever had was actually like a double overhead day at Breakwall, but I was able to avoid all the big sets and get out where I needed to be in the lineup to catch those waves in a spot where I didn't have to be fearful of what might happen.
Right. Yeah. No, it's very balanced. It's kind of, you can see how you're bringing this to your new career.
Yeah. It's all about like understanding our limits, right? And like wanting to do something that we enjoy, but not really have anything to prove at this point. I think when you start surfing later, like we did, like there is still an element of competition, of course. Like I think that's just inherent. It's really hard to squash that. But I just never really, it was like, I didn't feel like I had that much to prove to anyone.
Yeah. No, it's awesome that you were listening to yourself. we talked a little bit when we spoke before about, what it's like to have a boyfriend in the water and one who's really influential. And I know in your story, kind of as you told it now, that you were on shorter boards, but you always kind of had this draw to the long board.
Yeah.
But I remember you saying it was kind of his pushing to get you on shorter boards.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to hear a little bit about what that experience was like, because it's very mixed for people. I have talked to, somebody who said, oh, it's great. My husband and I just go out and we have such a good time.
Yeah.
But that's not what I always hear.
Yeah. I think for any of us, like surfing is very much an individual sport, right? It's our relationship with the ocean. And so when somebody comes in, no matter how great their intentions may be, and then, they just want to kind of like exert a little bit of like influence over that relationship that's very, unique to a person. It was tough for me. And I've also like admittedly been like really independent my entire life. I've never been very good at taking like advice, especially advice that's unsolicited. Like I want to figure things out myself, This is about me. This is my journey learning how to surf. Like I understand you want me to get better. And he's also like very much a leader type, his father died pretty young. So he's a person that was the man of his house, of his household. He had 3 younger sisters. So of course, he was kind of always bossing them around. So he's kind of a bossy guy, but with good intentions.
Yeah.
But so I would just be like, dude, if you tell me to go, I'm not going to go. Like, let me figure out which wave I want to go on. Just, and it was ultimately kind of a foreshadowing of like why that relationship didn't work out, because we were both really headstrong and we're very good at communicating that. But I remember, I was longboarding. I had this 9-foot longboard. Who's the guy who used to shape, who lived right across from Kahalu, and everybody had the longboards? Gaylord.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had like a 9.0 Gaylord. I can't remember where I bought it. And for Christmas one year, my ex, he ended up buying me like a 7.6 JC board. And it was almost just like shaped kind of like a gun, although obviously not that big. But he was like, if at first you don't succeed, try again. So it's like he bought me this new board. Then we ended up selling my longboard at a garage sale when we were moving. And so that was like the only board I had left, right? It was this 7.6 gun shaped board. And I was like, this is not working for me. Like the progression I was having in surfing and the joy I was feeling, like the progression stalled. And then surfing all of a sudden became this like frustrating thing for me. I wasn't having the fun I used to. And I think in a way I kind of like blamed my ex-boyfriend for that a little bit.
Well, I think, there's just a great metaphor all the way through that, and especially with surfing. And it sounds like you really were on your own mission, but it's hard. You feel vulnerable all the time with surfing because it's so hard to progress. Yeah. So on the one hand, you're like, okay, I'm going to listen to good information. Oh, but not from him. And, then you get on a board and you didn't follow your instinct, right? You didn't keep your own board. You didn't listen to your own heart. And it's so much about that relationship that it's like, then you've betrayed yourself and then you're mad. I had a board story. I had this, it actually came from a boyfriend, but he shaped this board for me. And it was a magic board. It was beautiful 8-foot fun board. He painted on it. He put an inscription, we broke up and I, fell in love with the next guy. And I felt it was a different story, but the same idea. Like I got rid of the board because I was like, oh, I shouldn't, have this romantic attachment. It was inscribed to me. Oh my God, girls, keep your magic boards. I've said it before, but no matter what anybody tells you, it's different circumstance, but again, I didn't listen to my gut. And your board is your relationship too, so you have a relationship with the board, you have a relationship with the ocean, and that facilitates, if you're an amazing surfer, you can, still progress. But even so, I watch the pro contests and they all have special boards, like, everybody has a relationship. So it's just part of that. Yeah. Finding your own voice.
It really was. And then like an element, I think to it also was that I felt like, cause I never asked for the help, right? Like I felt like I was on kind of a good path to like, I'm figuring out on my own and I am getting better. I'm progressing, but it was like all of the unsolicited coaching. I think that was like and that's like me just having pride issues and not wanting to be told, that what I'm doing wasn't the right way to do it or whatever. Like those are my personal issues obviously coming out, but it was a struggle for me. And, there was a lot of love in that relationship outside of this like conflict that we had in the water. But at the same time, like that was a love that he and I both shared, like the love of surfing.
Yeah.
And so how unfortunate that would be a place where our relationship wasn't at its strongest, was when we were like both doing this thing that we love to do.
It is funny. And it's also, probably that I'm sure went the way it was supposed to go and all of that. But yeah, there's a real lesson. And I do think it's more common for women. Just we get influenced by their energy more, and maybe the reason that they offer advice, they don't really get influenced necessarily the same way. But, for some reason, I mean, oh my gosh, the couple of times that I've, had romantic relationships in the water, it just gets in my head, even when they're trying to be cool, it just gets in my head. And I've made the mistake of always dating surfers who were better than me. Maybe it'd be different. Yeah. Well, no, but I don't want to teach one either.
Yeah.
But just them even existing and the fact that, they're getting waves I'm not getting, or even giving helpful information. But, the other thing is, I think with the unsolicited advice is that we're, and I talked about this with Jeannie, who's just learning now at 67, like you're working on a lot. We have a lot going on, and especially learning as an adult, like we have a whole checklist of stuff we're working on, and we might've just had a huge success in our minds with this. And then somebody comes up and says, oh, you should have paddled over there. And you just want to like whack them over the head because they don't really understand that you have this whole thing going on, and you're focused. So, it's challenging. But yeah, it's funny though.
I remember one specific instance. So there was, the majority of it was like, just like bickering back and forth, and people that would out in the water with us would laugh. Like we would all laugh. They'd be like, oh, listen to you too. But we took a trip to Kauai and we went out to Kalihiwai. And, it was not a good day there. And if it was a good day, we would have never been allowed to paddle out because it's super localized spot. Like they're not going to let anybody paddle out there who's not from Kauai, especially us, even though we were obviously from Hawaii, we didn't have rental boards, but there was only a couple other people out. So, he was sitting like at the lineup and I was probably just a little bit inside of them. We both caught waves. It was a fun session. We came in and then we met up with another friend and they asked how the waves were. And he was like, oh, it was fun. I caught a couple. She was on the inside catching the scraps is what he said. Oh. And I was like, I was literally 2 feet in front of you. And also I felt so diminished, right?
Yeah.
Like I was just, I don't know. It was so weird. And again, this is like my pride stuff. But it was really, and I don't think he intended it to be disrespectful. He was like, why are you mad? This is just like common terminology with surfing. And maybe it is, although I haven't heard it. And I have not heard that term scraps a ton. But I was just like, I was so bothered by it. That's probably like the one big fight we got into about surfing. So I was like, why did you have to say that? Why did it have to be, I was catching scraps?
It's really interesting. It's very tender. There's something very tender about it. Like, I don't know if you'd have had the same reaction about snowboarding, if they were like, you're on the bunny slopes. You probably just would have been laughed and been like, whatever. But there's something very vulnerable about surfing. I've heard I joke that I surf scraps a lot. So that's, probably why I've heard it more.
I never heard that before. And I was just like,
Totally. I would have been super pissed.
I, not long before I ended up leaving Kona, I dated another surfer and he was another like I think he's kind of a control freak in his life outside of the water, but also in the water. He was calling me into a lot of stuff. And by this point, I'm a much better surfer. And oftentimes he was calling me into good waves. So I was like, okay, it didn't annoy me as much. And I think I had kind of learned a little bit of a lesson, but it was to me that then like, here's another surfer I'm dating who's kind of doing the same thing. Why do you think that I couldn't figure out that this was a good wave that I wanted to go on? Like, I don't need you to tell me to go.
Right. I think that's what it is there's something in there, and again, I totally agree. It's our own issues in a lot of ways, like just laugh it off, whatever, but it is. And yes, it's with all the best intentions, but somehow it's that creeper. And I think it could also be too, because we're so sensitive to energy. Everyone I've talked to agrees with this in some level, I think. So, how you can literally be out and suddenly one person comes out and the whole energy changes and they don't even have to be doing anything. Sometimes somebody paddles up, they're not even going for my waves, but suddenly I can't surf.
Yeah.
Like, And I know that's on me to have my relationship with the ocean. And we were talking about that, I think the other night, like I have this whole new mantra, like the relationship is between me and the ocean. It has nothing to do with all of these people, as our breaks have gotten crowded, more and more crowded too.
Yeah.
And when I really focus in on that, but yeah, so it's like amplified, then it's a personal relationship, and then somebody's getting their head. And yes, our strong, beautiful, powerful, amazing, connected selves should be utterly, unfazed. And then I think I get mad at myself when I get affected. So it makes it even worse, then I'm frustrated that I'm affected. And then I just paddle down the rapids.
Yeah. Yeah, but it does. It kind of like it snowballs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting spiritual practice. And with relationship, yeah. Like on the one hand, it's great that the guy could kind of block for you or give up a wave. I had somebody give me a wave the other day. It wasn't a boyfriend. Technically, I don't know if giving me a wave was maybe too strong of a word, but he certainly could have taken it. And it was one of the waves I'm going to remember for a long time. It just lined up. Awesome. And I think he just had a really good one, but he absolutely was deeper. He could have taken it. And he just said, go, that's yours. And literally when I came back out with this huge smile, he was like, you're going to remember that one. You're going to remember that wave. Like when you actually get the good wave and you surf it well, which those very infrequently go together for me. Especially since I've been shortboarding. Oy, it's so hard. So tell me something, because we're so critical of ourselves, but what is something you love about your own surfing?
Gosh, I think for a while there wasn't, like, I was frustrated with it. Like I felt like I had hit this plateau and nothing was progressing. I was like, man, I don't know. Like, do I just suck at surfing? And so at that point in time, I was getting ready to turn 40. So, here I have been surfing 10 years. I was like a year or two removed from that relationship where I was being pushed to, surf shorter and shorter equipment. And I was like, I'm going to buy myself a board. And gosh, I was hanging out on the beach at Pine Trees with a bunch of the uncles and stuff. And Uncle Mel Behasa was there. And he's, of course, like a local legend for shaping. And he's pretty much retired. I think he shaped so much. He's, he has like health issues. His shoulder hurts. He doesn't want to spend time shaping for other people. He just wants to surf now. But I just got him on a good day. And because it was my 40th, he was like, okay, I'll make a board for you. And he and I had been surfing together, for years. He like understood my style and what my strengths and weaknesses were. And, he basically was just like, well, what color board do you want? And I said, well, I want it to be white and fade into like the color blue of Kona's waters. So that was all I really told him. He said, okay. And when he called me and told me it was ready, I showed up and it was, oh God, it was so beautiful. And he had his logo was in this like light pink color. So I have this white and light blue and then this like purpley pink logo. And then he put this mermaid decal on the side and she's like all tatted up with tribal tattoos and her long hair is flowing. And he's like, oh, I don't know. I just saw her and she reminded me of you. So I put her on the board and I was like, oh my God, it was so perfect. And that board was magical. Like from the first time I paddled out on it, it just like, it was the perfect volume for me. It was high performance. So it wasn't super thick. I felt like I could like turn it really easily, and I just, that board for me was like, it symbolized not only me finally just like being true to myself and surfing the way I wanted to, but like in doing that, it was like all of a sudden my surfing just got like, I leveled up finally, like after feeling like I was just at this nowhere state for such a long time. So I think what I like most about my surfing is the fact that it really has just like been my own journey to kind of like battle through the tough moments I've had in it, but I've stuck with it the whole time. And, and now it's gotten me to the point where like we'll vacation down in Mexico a lot. My mom owns timeshares down in Cabo and there's some decent surf spots around there. And even though I'm not local in those lineups, and even though I'm always on rental boards, now I'm at the point where I can like paddle out to any lineup and catch waves and people respect me and I can surf them well. And that makes me feel really good that I got from like point A to this point. Yeah. I don't get to surf as much anymore. I think that makes me feel really good about it, that I chose something and I followed through.
It's a massive accomplishment. I mean, I got all choked up hearing about that. And that board, oh, that board is so beautiful.
Oh my God, it was gorgeous. And
Was beautiful.
so ironically, yeah. So I surfed that board like 2 years exclusively, you know, in small surf and in big surf. And I had amazing sessions on it. And then one day it was like a storm surf day at Pine Trees. I was at the bay, like those, you know, those days when like all of a sudden a weird peak would just like pop up. And if you, you know, if you were in the wrong place, you were going to get pounded. And that's exactly what happened. And ironically enough, Uncle Mel was in the water with me, the shaper.
Wow.
Right next to me. And I see this, you know, wave pop up, and it's not the kind where I could turn turtle on it. And I was like, oh, there wasn't a lot of people out. So I was just like, whatever. I just, you know, swam under it and ditched my board. And when I came up, I saw the board like perfectly broken in half. And I'm sure it had been, I think about it, I'm like, probably from sitting in the back of my truck, right? And bouncing along and over and over the speed bumps, and then like driving really fast in and out of my Hyulas. Like, I'm sure I weakened the board. It probably that point where it sat, where it rested on my tailgate, even though I always tried to have it cinched in tightly. Yeah. Or that wave just like hit it perfectly. But yeah, that thing just snapped right in half. And I was so sad.
I literally rememred the picture you posted. Like, I wasn't there, but you posted this picture and I was like, oh my God. I mean,
so sad.
That was, now, how long was it from when that happened to when you moved?
I want to say within like a year.
I feel like that was really close together.
Yeah. I was borrowing boards for a while. I was just surfing a foamy, you know, I would try to like focus on the short board that I still had, that my ex had bought me. I still had that board too. So I was like just surfing whatever, but not really feeling stoked on anything. And then my uncle, who's also my godfather, he's so nice. He was like, oh, I feel so bad about your board. You get a replacement board. I want to buy it for you. So I tried to get Uncle Mel to make me another one, and he was just really not wanting to. So I took the hint and I was like, okay, fine. So I called TNC over on Oahu, and they custom made me a board with similar dimensions, and I had them painted the exact same way. And I'm literally looking at it right now. It's sitting underneath my window here, and I've surfed it a handful of times, and I just don't have that connection with it.
Yeah. I just think it's so interesting that it literally, especially you told that story, it literally brought you to this apex of like fullness of who you are and who you are as a surfer and who you are as a woman, and kind of being ready for that next wave. Like, and the board broke, and it took a while for everything else to settle in and be like, okay, I'll always be here for you in some way. Your surf stoke will always be here. Your skill level will be here. Your wave knowledge will be here. But yeah, that's really interesting. That is
very symbolic once you put it like that. Like, I didn't really think about how, the timing of it was kind of, towards the end of me being on the Big Island. And it had also kind of reached a point, and I know you can relate. I mean, I'm sure it's even more so now, like Pine Trees, after they paved that road, things, that place just getting more and more busy, and people not really knowing the etiquette, and just it becoming a lot more frustrating to surf than it was fun, and I found myself getting a little bit snappier out in the water than I had before. When that happens, I would say, oh, gosh, it was awful. It was like, I was at the bay one day, it was a Sunday afternoon, a nice set wave came. It was my wave. I went, a girl dropped in on me who she didn't mean to, like, she should not have been out in the lineup. She drops in and goes straight like on her belly as I'm starting to turn down the line. So I have to straighten out really fast so I don't hit her. And there's all these kids right in front of me.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm going to run over all these like little kids. It was one of those moments where I came up and I was like, what are you doing? You shouldn't be out there. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know how to control your board. I mean, I kind of was like, I definitely snapped. And then it just ruined my whole session, right? Like, it got the best of me at that point in time. And I was like, I don't want to feel like this when I'm out here surfing. Like, I don't want to have to tell somebody that.
Yeah. It's, like when when you were learning and you read all the etiquette, and now there's a big, it's really interesting. So I talked to you, and I talked to Mackenzie, another surfer girl here, who really put in some time, and, something to acknowledge that those of us who sort of came up through just trying to figure it out and getting pounded and whatever, we didn't grow up with this whole concept of community. And it's been really interesting. I mean, yes, you're friends that but there's still a level of competition. So it's been really interesting to me to hear. I actually knew a woman who started here, And she just went up to Lyman's every day at dawn. And actually her experience was, oh, I made all the best friends in the world. I'm like, I'm having such a great time. And she had this incredible experience. Whereas I've been kind of more pinched and closed off and like, get off my goddamn wave.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not always, but that's because I had to scrap for everything. Like I just had to work so hard for every wave, of my life. So it's an interesting dynamic that's now happening. And I know I think we talked about this before. Maybe it was McKinsey that we were talking about this. Sometimes, as much as I love having women in the lineup, I do, because I really like that energy. It just feels really different. But sometimes the woman that paddles out is going to be the one that wants my exact waves rather than the guy who is going to sit deeper.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
So it's an interesting, I have to like recalibrate, my thinking, and actually talking to these women with this great sense of community has lightened me up. Like it's made me realize like, okay, I am the problem. Actually, it's, it's definitely a problem. And you can say it with a certain amount of respect to people, but it's also important at the same time for people to do some enforcing, absolutely. Like you did, like, it's very uncomfortable. It's very unpleasant to do it. I really don't enjoy it, but otherwise it's dangerous and it's not fun for everybody. And,
Oh, we froze. Okay. And that's that's the thing about surfing. It's a really dangerous sport. And I think if people don't quite understand that, then obviously it gets put into bad situations. I mean, when you're talking to a woman who learned to surf at Lyman's, of course she's going to have it like a sense of community because there's 800 million people that are always surfing there. Like that's one of the waves in Kona that I wish I would be able to surf more, but I get so like the crowd there. It is just really like, I almost have like a mental block against it. Like I've paddled out and I've caught some fun waves there. And I'm like, man, I really would like to come out here on a good day and surf it. But then it's like, there's so many people like dropping in on the same wave. And then there's people on the inside trying to catch the, a little bit smaller ones. And it's just like, it's really intimidating.
Yeah, definitely that wave can be challenging. I've had some gifts there.
Yeah.
And I usually sit like I swing and wait for the ones that are going to swing west and see if I get lucky. And I have a board that I love so much, my 8-foot board that was shaped by a man named Glenn Kennedy, who is a kind of a Malibu hero. And he had this little shop in Topanga, like on Ventura Boulevard in Woodland Hills, like inland from the ocean. And he shaped my board that I brought here, that I bought to move back here. And he was this amazing man, just one of these people that made you feel like $1 million. Every single person ever walked into his life. And he passed away a couple of years ago. And I took his board out to Lyman's. And I was like, okay, Glenn, let's get a bomb. And seriously, like, I never sit out at the point, but the waves came and all those guys went, they all got waves. And I was like sitting there kind of between the peak and the west peak. And here comes this wave. And it's literally, I'm the only one that could have it. Like nobody else could catch it. And I remember I paddled for that wave and I did nothing on it except go down the line. I was so afraid to fall off that wave. I'm like, we were just going down the line and it just screaming fast. And it was amazing, but it has to, I mean, I feel like for me, it's all about my relationship to the ocean and my relationship to myself. And so it's difficult for me. I think when you grow up as a kid and you've got your friends and whatever, and there's still competition, but it's a different experience. We all have our own different experience. And for some people right now, some of the women learning, it really is about community.
Yeah.
They love that sense of community. And I love hearing about it. It's like, it's so cool. But there is also a point that everybody gets in their head and they want their wave, and that's difficult to, I think, there's a struggle with how do you rectify. They're like, oh, this is great. These are all my friends. Get off my goddamn wave.
Well, I think that's the point I was trying to get at. Like when you surf in town, right, you learn at Kahaluu and you learn at Lyman's, there's just going to be a lot of people kind of all the time. So it's a little bit easier to feel more comfortable at, whereas like, surfing at Pines, even though there is a lot of people out there, like the crowds, at least they used to kind of be more at the bay, and there wouldn't be that many people who didn't know what they were doing at the Rock or at Elevators or Rat Bowl. So it was like, you could kind of, I can see like get a little bit protective of like those spots. And then, when all of a sudden like that crowd of people is spreading out more. And then they're like wanting the community, the community aspect of it. And so all of a sudden, like 5 girls paddle out and you're like, I've never seen you out here before. And now all of a sudden, like the dynamic gets thurned off. And then sometimes the lineup will get thrown off if they don't know like where exactly to sit.
Yeah.
And that can get frustrating.
Yeah, no, it can. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'll break your heart. Today, there were probably 20 people at elevators.
Oh God, that sounds.
So I was at Rat Bowls. These are just like everybody listening. These are our home breaks. These are, and it's not always like that. There was a period right after COVID, probably right after you left. So we had the lockdown, and some people got to really experience our beaches and county beaches were shut, and so you couldn't drive there. You had to walk in. So that was really incredible. But I was very lucky to have a job that whole time, but also a little sad that all my friends were like surfing all day with no crowds. And, I had one day that I really got to take advantage of it, but it was so beautiful walking in and just walking along Ooma and, just such beautiful places. But then kind of right when it opened up, a whole bunch of people had moved here. And I think there were a lot of people that were like staying with their parent or their like aunts or grandparents or whatever. So there was kind of this whole, gigantic group of people on like foam boards, like suddenly out at elevators, which can be a pretty advanced wave. I really just have a couple more questions. And in one, I wonder about this, about, every woman. Did you ever struggle with the sense of body image or being in a bathing suit or any of that? Or were you comfortable, or what was your experience?
That's funny. No, I think when I first started surfing, everything, I was just like, whatever. I was in my 30s. I was paddling, like I was in decent shape. And I remember it's like you move out to Hawaii and you notice immediately, like there's the style of swimsuits that the girls wear in Hawaii. And then there's like the style that gets worn on the mainland, which is obviously like a lot more coverage.
Yeah.
We're kind of conservative. And then girls in Hawaii are like, butt cheeks hanging out everywhere. But I would say it wasn't until I got like later in my 30s and close to 40. And then, like my body shape changes a little bit. And then girls are like all of a sudden surfing in thongs. And I was like, I don't feel super comfortable anymore. And thankfully that was when like peak high started and everybody started wearing like the bodysuits. And then I realized I loved surfing in a bodysuit because I didn't have to worry about pulling my bottoms up every time I duck dove.
Seriously.
And, I'm kind of chesty. And so like, I didn't have to worry about my boob falling out of my top. So it was like everything, all problems were solved. And I was getting like sun coverage in cute suits. So I spent so much money on those peak high bodysuits.
You had some really cute ones.
Yeah. I know. I have half here with me in Oregon. And then the other half I have a bin of clothes at my friend's house.
Oh my gosh. I want to shout out Pikai, Pikai, Pikai. Yeah. The bathing suits are so beautiful, and the bodysuits and the one pieces and everything. It's been a while since I bought one. When I first moved back here, we got the one pieces, and I didn't get the bodysuit. I guess I always shied away, but beautiful. Yeah. I do wear other bodysuits though, and they are just a complete lifesaver. Yeah. When I think too, it's just a question I like to ask. When I moved to Hawaii, one of my favorite things was seeing that women of every shape let it all hang out. So you really don't feel that. I came from Southern California where, you're obese at a size 4.
Right.
And you need liposuction or whatever. And I didn't have a bad body image in particular, but that's just was the norm. So I just loved it. And I tell my friends who have come to visit, who've had those questions about being in a bathing suit, I'm like, girl, you're good. It's, but I know some people, I see it, like there's a Facebook group called Women Who Surf. And people bring that question up a lot here. I think that you have so much strength from being a surfer. That's a lot of what happens. Yeah. So the last thing I really want to ask you, because I want to I want to share a couple of things, because you said, and I think this is important for some people because they don't always feel an immediate connection to the water. And we touched on it a little bit, but you said something to me that I really loved was like, you didn't have an innate one. It had to develop and grow. Yeah. And what was it that really grew that relationship with the water?
I've always just kind of like no pun intended, but like kind of gone with the flow. So when I moved to Hawaii, it was kind of like a somewhat spur of the moment decision. Some family stuff led me there, but I wasn't really knowing what that was going to look like for me. And then of course, surfing started, and that was fun, but surfing it's really hard to learn, so that was progressing slowly. And then I decided I wanted to paddle. I wanted to paddle outrigger. And it was mainly because at the time, and I don't know if you were in Kona during this period, but Tui Tonga was a club, and they only had it was only a men's club, but I tell you, they were so hot. And they like it was all the hottest like Polynesian boys. And then there was like a couple super cute haole guys, and they would just like strut around the pier with their shirts off and all their tattoos, and they're just ripped. And I was like, oh my God, I totally have to paddle, because I knew my brother and sister were on the Big Island in my family, but I didn't have any friends. And so I really was like looking to network. And so paddling really provided that community, right? The ocean community. And it really started my love affair with the ocean, like that the lifestyle that exists in Hawaii that's so amazing. And, with paddling, as you move through the novice ranks and then get into like the open cruise, it gets really competitive. And there is like an element of politics that happens within the clubs that I didn't necessarily like. It took away a lot of the fun of paddling when all of a sudden now you're like competing with your best friend for a seat to do this race. And it's like, oh, this is awkward. And Mackenzie actually paddled with me. That's when she and I met and became such good friends, was when we were paddling in like 2008, I think. And so paddling like led me into this ocean lifestyle and taught me a lot about the ocean. But then after a few years, that kind of soured, and I was really starting to like surfing more. And then I had started dating that surfer, and paddling was taking up too much time. So, I stopped paddling, and then it became all about surfing. And, and then eventually I meet some girls who are free divers, and then I start free diving, and it's just this whole world exists in the ocean that people just have no idea about. And especially me growing up, on the Oregon coast, it's like, oh, look, ocean, cold, gray, sharky,
right?
Kelp, that really seems that interesting. But then all of a sudden you're in Hawaii, and it's like colorful fish and reef and turquoise waves and glassy walls. And you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And so really it was just like, I think like thirsting for new experiences, and that the ocean was providing. And that's really like what kind of led me down that path. I'm also a Scorpio, so I'm a water sign.
You're a water sign.
Has something to do with it. But, I had like a few months, I think like 6 months into surfing, I had this really bad injury on my arm that required 60 stitches. So that kept me out of the water for a couple months. And then I had some health stuff that happened, kind of, cancer stuff. In 2014 that kept me out of the water for a while. And those moments when I couldn't get in the ocean, I was just like such a grumpy person.
So that's interesting, because it sounds like you've really come through this kind of wholeness evolution. One of my questions for you is how are you taking care of your ocean girl? And how have you made this such a different experience? You did this willingly,
totally
stepped away.
I think that my ocean girl is like slowly just dying inside of me, and not that it's going away dying, but like dying like a slow death as my like mermaid gills are drying up. So she's very much still in existence. And I've been able to have, like, I was back in Hawaii for 2 weeks last year, and then I've been to Mexico a couple times. So I'm being able to vacation and be in the water has helped a lot. But, there's just being back in the Northwest has different stuff to offer for me here. So last summer, when I first got back here, I was living at the coast and trying to surf and just not really feeling the same connection to the ocean as I had in Hawaii. For me, the connection here is more with the trees and the rivers and the mountains, and like being in the woods, going on hikes, stuff like that. So I'm like filling up my cup in other parts of nature. Yeah. But I would love to I would love to be in the warm water. I've been looking at all of that. I had to unfollow like Big Island Surf. I was a part of the Kona Women's Surf Club on Facebook. I had to unfollow all of those things because it was making me so sad.
Oh, I know. Thank you for talking. Because I know I was like, oh no, I hope this doesn't make her sad.
No, oh my gosh, not at all. No, but I mean, like seeing all that stuff on a day-to-day basis. I still go back and check all of those things, but it just has to be on my terms. It can't be flooding my feed. And I know that the waves have been amazing lately.
Right.
La la la. Like
yeah. But you look so radiant, and just it's obvious that this new big wave you're riding, to use the bad metaphors, is really suiting you. And it takes a lot of courage to step away from, this place that has really nourished you and say, like, I can nourish myself. I'm going to be nourished, and I'm going to be nourished with this really important mission, which is, helping make sure, that you are present for difficult things that are happening in the world. And, that's the contribution is just super badass. And to me, it feels like the greatest way to honor that surfer girl in a way is to come in off the wave and be like, in the most unusual way, like, I'm going to ride, I'm going to do this way with all that you've learned. I think of you on that board, your magic board, and then stepping off that board, it's like it took you onto to the mountain, and you just walked onto the mountain, and you're like, thank you, mermaid, and you're still in there.
It's so true. I mean, I think I got to the point with my surfing where I knew that I could step away from it and then return to it. And I was still always going to be there, just muscle memory, and then comfort in the ocean, knowing how to read it, knowing how to surf now, having it be second nature. Yeah. That it was okay for me to take a step away for a little while to kind of develop this other part of my life that felt like it was really stunted. And I hope one day that I can come back to Kona. I mean, maybe I will just end up being a cop there in a few years. I mean, you never know where life is going to lead. That would be amazing. But at this point in time, I feel like there really is an opportunity to like make some sort of an impact on the world. And I want to do that somehow.
Oh, that's so great. I was going to ask you another question, but I think we should leave it right there. Okay. I think that's a perfect ending. And thank you so much for being so open and sharing your story. And just, this, to me, it's the best possible thing for surfing to make us. This is the transformation that the podcast is about, like the surfing. And it's not only surfing. Of course, we have a whole other life, and you've done a lot of work in different things. But ultimately, this passage, that you've done, this journey has led you to this amazing new frontier. And thank you so much for being on the podcast and for sharing everything and for what you're doing.
Of course. Yeah. I'm so honored. Thank you for even thinking of me and letting me share my story. That's really very sweet of you. And it really just helps like solidify the journey I'm on right now. And that, that people are supporting me. I never knew. I think that I've had some friendships who haven't been super, like people are like, you're being a cop. Like, what are you doing as a cop?
Right.
Nothing about me is going to change.
Right.
Badge, I just want to help people.